Welcome to What's Working, everyone. I'm Cam Marston. Thank you so much for joining in this week's show. We're going to have Joe Bonner on in a moment. He'll be across from me on the microphone. He's on his way to the studio as we speak. Joe is known mostly around here right now as the fourth president of the University of South Alabama. I've heard him introduced as the president of the USA, and I always kind of get a giggle out of that. Previously to being fourth president of the University of South Alabama, he's chief of staff to Alabama Governor Kay Ivey from 2019 to 2021. And prior to that, from 2003 to 2013, he was the U.S. representative for Alabama's first congressional district, as a Republican. He's another one of these gifted politicians from Wilcox County. Wilcox County seems to have something in the water that produces these remarkable politicians. Born and raised in Selma, reared in Camden, Joe Bonner, when we get back from this next break, we're going to ask him about third parties, the future of the Republican Party, what does it take to get elected today, et cetera, et cetera. Similar to the conversations we've had with other people in this chair in the past. We'll get started with that right after this break. This is Cam Marston. Poor communication is costing your business, and it's because many leaders don't have the skills to communicate well. Productivity's sinking, and you're losing sales. Teams are frustrated. So I created the Generational Insights Communications Academy to train leaders to communicate effectively with anyone in any situation. Fix communication breakdowns, build the company you deserve. Enroll your leaders today at cammarston.com/GICA. We're back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. Sitting across from me in the studio today is Joe Bonner. Joe and I have known each other for quite a while. You're likely familiar with his name if you're a local here. Let me give you a little bit about his background. He's yet another one of these remarkable people out of Wilcox County, Alabama. There's something in the water, Joe, in Wilcox County.
That's what they say.
Born in Selma, raised in Camden. 1989, promoted to Sonny Callahan's chief of staff. He ran for the office of Alabama's first congressional district and served in that role from 2003 to 2013. A member of the Republican Party. Currently, today, the fourth president of the University of South Alabama, a man just draping with accolades and credibility. Joe, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to What's Working.
Thank you. It's good to be on the program. I've listened to it a lot, so it's good to actually be a guest.
I'm glad to hear that, and thank you very much. We've talked a little bit prior to turning on the microphones. One of my concerns as this podcast has evolved is the politics of our nation. And though the show is called What's Working, the better title would be What's Not Working. And with that as a preface, tell me about the Republican Party when you were a representative there and contrast it to today. And tell me what's similar and what's different, if you would.
Well, Cam, I think that in many ways, the guiding principles of the Republican Party remain love of country, patriotism, belief in the Constitution, belief in the rule of law. But I will acknowledge that the Republican Party today is much different. Certainly when I started with Congressman Callahan as a campaign aide back in 1984, he got elected. So Sonny was elected to the second Reagan term. So that's when I went to Washington. I'd actually been an intern like you were. A few years later. I was an intern for Jack Edwards. So I grew up with the image of the Republican Party in Alabama, at least, being men like Jack Edwards and Jeremiah Denton and Sonny Callahan, Bill Cabanis, people that I think you look back on today, many of them, I guess all of those individuals have passed away. But certainly Senator Denton was a national hero, but really all of them, I think, when they left office were considered statesmen. Mm-hmm. And I think that they were respected and in many ways revered because they believed in the principles of the Republican Party, but they really believed in the underlying principles of America first. They were American leaders. They were members of the United States Congress, and they went to Washington not necessarily to make a name for themselves, but to represent their constituents and to represent the values that those constituents held. Fast forward, many people say the Republican Party today is the party of President Trump. Mm-hmm. And while there's probably been very few presidents in our lifetime who has ever been able to reshape a party more into his liking than President Trump, I don't know that really anyone else has ever attempted it like he has. President George H.W. Bush, President Ronald Reagan, President George W. Bush, President Gerald Ford, President Richard Nixon. Those were the presidents of my lifetime prior to President Trump. And I think in many ways, those presidents saw the presidency differently than President Trump does, saw the role of the United States in a different way. President Nixon was dealing with a different China than the China that President Trump is dealing with today. The Soviet Union was still intact. But when I look at some of the decisions that are being made in Washington and some of the conversations that my friends who are still in office are having about the state of affairs, about the just the ability to have a conversation about the direction our country needs to go in, it's a much different tone for sure. And it's not necessarily one. I'm not going to pretend, and I would be misleading you or your listeners, and they would know it right off the bat if I came out and said, "Oh, well, when I was in Congress, it was kumbaya every morning."
Right.
We got along. We had a lot of challenges. I mean, when I got elected, it was right after 9/11. So I was elected to President Bush's second term, and we had to deal with a very difficult and I guess he was in the middle of his first term, but we were dealing with a very different challenge facing our country and facing the world. But it is definitely as I was telling you before the program began, when I land in Washington today at Reagan Airport and I look out the window and see the majestic view of the National Mall and the monuments and the Capitol and the White House, it is beautiful. But in many ways, I feel like I'm visiting Washington for the first time because it's not a city that is anything like what I remember as a young man growing up, having the privilege of working there, and then having the added honor of being elected to represent the people of Alabama there for 6 terms.
Yeah, I know that flight, and I know that, I don't know, since the plane crash there, maybe whenever it was, if they still do that same route, but coming down the Potomac into Reagan and looking out the left side of the plane and seeing all those things is one of life's great treats. It gives me the chills to look at it. And I think, and I haven't been to DC in a while, but I can certainly understand that. You feel like a guest there versus warm memories. I feel like a guest in the party that I used to adore, and I can find no home there. And this has been said a number of times on this show. And I'll share with you what we talked about before the mics came on again. I'm the leftmost Republican and the rightmost Democrat. I live in the middle. I can find no voice, no traction. And it's infuriating to me. What is your reaction to that? What there are other people that I think listen to this program that feel the same way I do. What should I do?
Well, and we did talk about that before you turned the microphone on. And, the next question is there an opportunity for a third party?
Right.
And I'm not going to say that there's not, but I think it would be very difficult. The way the two parties have pretty well positioned themselves it would be hard to see a third party find success at a national level.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you saw some success at a state, and that state then showed the American people, or certainly the people of that state, that there is an opportunity for people in the middle to come together, then who knows? It might be. I'm certainly not saying anyone should abandon that goal. When I left Congress, I made a couple commitments to myself. I made a commitment that I would not sit back and pontificate about how good things used to be when I was there and how bad things are today. I made a commitment that I wouldn't criticize those who are currently in office because having been there, I do know that some of the decisions they have to make are really difficult decisions. They're big decisions. Voting on releasing the Jeffrey Epstein files was not a big decision. No one should have gotten a profile in courage to have done the right thing on that one. Right. But there are decisions about peace and security, about are we going to stand with Putin, or are we going to stand with people who are trying to live in freedom? Are we going to stand with countries that believe in human rights and in the dignity of human life? Or are we going to side with dictators and people who are only interested in their own personal benefit? So to me, I try hard not to criticize those who are in office, but there are times, Cam, that I look at some of the discussion and dialogue that's taking place, and like you, I scratch my head. I just don't have as much hair as you have. So when I scratch it, I have to be careful that I don't do too much damage up there. But I don't. The other thing I made a commitment to do, so I joined a group called the Reformers Caucus. And it's a bunch of former members of Congress. It's about an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. We actually had our first meeting in Philadelphia. We went to Independence Hall, and we made a commitment that we would do everything we could individually, not as a former congressman or a former senator, but as Americans, to try to encourage more civility in the debate.
When was this Reformers Caucus created? Is this new? It
was created right. So I left Congress in 2013. This would have been probably in about 2015, 2016. There are a number of people that were early on active in it that were friends of mine. But I will tell you, even the Reformers Caucus has kind of gotten quiet during the muddy conversations and debates that have taken place in recent years. And I'm sorry that happened, but it's like so many other things. People say they're frustrated with the debate. They're frustrated with the tone. They're frustrated with the lack of focus. I mean, the recent government shutdown being a good example. Tell me one winner in the shutdown. One. Yeah. I don't know of it. I know that there were a lot of good people who made some real sacrifices. I had to fly 3 times during that shutdown, and I would look at the TSA agents at the airport, and I would thank them because they were working without pay.
Right.
Now, they may have known they were going to get paid because they've always had to go back in and adjusted the back pay. But try telling that to the mortgage company that has the mortgage, or you've got a car note, or your children need braces or a surgery. Try talking. Your dad was my dentist, so you just can't tell your dentist, well, just do the braces or fix the problem, and I'll pay you when I can.
Right.
It just was the most unfortunate and unnecessary act I've seen in a long time. We had shutdowns when I was in Congress, so that's why I say I'm not being critical of either party or any one individual. But history should teach us that government shutdowns really rarely, if ever, produce a winner. And in my case, in my personal view, there were a lot of losers in that, and both parties were certainly losers.
The Reformers Caucus went quiet, you said, and it was around the muddy. You used the term muddy, the muddy conversations. Is that because there was no solution that the Reformers Caucus could find? Is that because they were both well entrenched in their politics? Why did they go quiet?
I think they probably went quiet because at the end of the day, a former politician, a former senator, a former governor, a former congressman really doesn't have much of a microphone anymore. People will say, well, why didn't you fix it when you were there? Why didn't you address what you can fill in the blank, term limits, the debt, the expansion of the welfare state. And it's a fair comment.
Yeah.
You go to office, it's not quite like Jimmy Stewart, but you go to office with noble goals and ideals, and then the reality of the day sets in, and you have to deal with the crises of the moment, and you have to deal with the challenges that you were not campaigning on, but that are real and that appear. So I think in many ways, probably the reason that the Reformers Caucus probably lost some steam is that we did op-eds, we wrote a number of articles. We were encouraged to go out and speak to schools and talk about it. But it wasn't like we were advocating a third party. We were really advocating that the two political parties that we have, the Republicans and the Democrats, return to civility, return to a conversation and not yelling at each other. But again, we also had, back when Jack Edwards used to tell the story when C-SPAN came about and how members of Congress they actually had a makeup room at the House studio, and you'd go put makeup on because you were going to be on TV. And for many years, members of Congress lived in relative obscurity, except in their district or in their state, where they were hopefully well known enough to get reelected. But they didn't really, they weren't national figures. Along during the Republican Revolution, when Newt Gingrich helped end 40 years of Democrat reign in the House of Representatives, you saw members of Congress, sometimes they were speaking to an empty House chamber at night, but they were really using that forum to build momentum for change. And nowadays, with all the different channels, podcasts, and all the different ways to communicate, what you've seen is also a deterioration, if not an outright loss, of the role of the mainstream media.
Yeah.
I mean, go pick up the Mobile Press Register today. Whoops, well, you can't do that. We don't have one. You look at one of the three TV stations, they basically only have two or three personalities, and everything is being reported by a cameraman who goes out and covers a story. And I'm not being critical of the local media. I think they do the best they can. And this is true nationwide. It's not just true here in Mobile. But the reality is that there's not as much thoughtful discussion taking place in newspapers or in what we used to call traditional journalism. And nowadays you've got people talking about something they heard on social media, and therefore that's a fact.
Well, and it's rampant. You're right about that. The Republican Party has become, you mentioned this, has become the party of Trump. My sense is that as we're recording this, there's a little bit of fracture in that right now. I don't know. I just some sort of inner knower in me says I think we're seeing a fracture in that. I fell in love with the Republican Party when you and I first knew each other when I was an intern for Sonny Callahan. Is there ever a chance that it could return to what it used to be? I've read some opinion writers, national opinion writers say, There is no returning from a revolution. Revolution redefines everyone that was a participant in it. And this is a revolution. And the party as we knew it will never come back. What is your reaction to that?
Well, I hope they're wrong.
I do too. Sure.
And I believe they are wrong. What we don't know is how the Trump years will end. We don't know how the MAGA movement will continue, or who will be the leaders of that movement. You've got a lot of different people, influencers, they call themselves today, that are not in elected office, that are sometimes self-anointed, but they are out there helping to influence decisions that are being made at a national level and state levels as well. But at the end of the day, I remain optimistic that at the core, the American people really are in control of this. They may not necessarily understand the power they have. One of the things that has concerned me, and it also, I think, has had an impact on the number of people, good people that you'd like to see run for office that choose not to, but you see the continuing decline in the number of people who vote. And so that's something that I have preached for a long time. And that is that we have a personal responsibility. If you're blessed enough to have been born in this country or to have come to this country legally and to become a U.S. citizen, both of which are noble paths, then one of the privileges we have is the right to vote. And I get very frustrated when I hear people say, I didn't even know there was an election.
Yes.
I know you do too.
Yes. Bradley Byrne was in that chair talking about how he tried to get people to turn out and the remarkable number that had no idea the election was going on.
Yeah. Well, it is remarkable and it's scary. But at the end of the day, it's a privilege that we have been blessed with, and it's one that I think we will find once again. And that's the power to influence the direction we want our country to go in, we want our state or our local community to go in. And that's people becoming informed, becoming active. Everyone doesn't have to run for office, but everyone should be involved in the political process because it's something, as you know, that separates us from the rest of the world.
Yeah. I interviewed Governor Frank Keating several weeks ago, and it was his belief that we all have an obligation to be involved in politics. And he was raised, I've told this story several times since hearing him tell it, he was raised by a father that said, listen, you've had a pretty good life. It doesn't end when you retire from your profession. A new chapter starts, and that is serving and representing. And Keating chose the governorship as I'm shortening a very long story, but he chose the governorship. And do you feel like we see the right people raising their hand to run for office today?
Well, I wish there were a few more people that would raise their hand, but I understand the hesitancy that many of them have. A young man came to me in this most recent congressional race when the Alabama legislature, in my opinion, made the mistake of believing that ignoring a federal a court order would work for us. It's kind of like a government shutdown. It hadn't really worked too well over the years. And the decision was made to allow the congressional districts to be drawn by a special master of the federal courts as opposed to the elected officials that we had sent to Montgomery. So we have a new congressional district map. Mobile is split in half. The first district and the second district don't look anything like it did back when you worked up there or when I worked up there. But I had a guy come see me, and he said, Joe, I'm really seriously thinking about running for Congress. I grew up in Bay Minette. I have a lot of family and friends there. He had done very well. So he had been very successful in his career, financially and otherwise. And to the point, he said, I want to give back. And he said, what do you think? Well, he had a young family, had a wife. And since he was from Bay Minette, I said, look, I'm never going to talk anyone out of running for office, especially someone that I know has a good heart and a good head on his shoulders or her shoulders. I said, but I just want to tell you, you grew up in Bay Minette, so here's what you got to face. You're going to go in Streets, a great little local restaurant in Bay Minette. You're going to be running for office, and you're going to walk in there, and the place is going to be packed. It's going to be a Friday. And there's going to be about 140 people in that restaurant. And because you're running for Congress, you're going to need to go speak to everyone in that restaurant. Because if you miss somebody, then you're very likely going to have missed an opportunity to ask them for their vote. Some people are going to be talking about family matters. They're not really going to be wanting to be interrupted. Some people are not necessarily going to want to have a politician come over while they're eating their fried shrimp and shake hands with them. So there are going to be some people that really aren't going to be interested in who you are, don't even know who you are, but you still have that opportunity. I said, but the sad thing is that you go in there, and of those 140, 150 people, a lot of them are just tourists passing through, going to the beach or leaving the beach. But you don't know that. So you got to speak to the people who are potential voters and people that are from Missouri. Then you've got to recognize the fact that of the people that are actual voters in that district, many of them don't know whether they live in the 1st district or the 2nd district. It's not something that's important to them until they need their congressman. So that's going to cut that number down to probably about 50 or 60. And then you're going to realize when you leave the restaurant that of that 50 or 60, probably only about 15 or 20 of the people in that restaurant that you spoke to will actually be voters who are going to take the time to go vote.
So you go from 160 to 20 people that matter.
That's right.
And it's taken hours.
It's taken hours, and you don't know who those people are. And at the end of the day, that's the dilemma that a lot of young men and women face today. We both know people. We go to church with them. They're leaders in the community. They've been successful. Many of them have served in uniform, and they've come back with amazing stories of heroism, and they don't consider themselves heroes. But I've encouraged some of them to run, and they've looked at me and they said, Joe, could you really tell us to leave our family with our 4 young kids and go to Washington in the environment it's in today? And I will tell you, it's a fair point.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to give up hope. I do think that this chapter we're in now will one day end and a new chapter will be written. And so the question is, will we, those who would like to see a return to civility, at least in the conversation, will we be able to at least have some role in helping to write that next chapter? And I hope we do.
What would you do? This is a very hypothetical question. You decided you were going to run for office today, knowing our landscape in the year 2025. What would you do differently? How would you conduct a campaign today differently than what you've done in the past?
Well, when I ran in 2002, social media was nowhere near what it is today. So the reality is that I would have to hire people who were experts in social media. Bill Yeager, the late Bill Yeager of Timms and Yeager, was my advertising guru. And back then, you needed to have relationships with the press register. You needed to have relationships with Channel 5, Channel 10, and Channel 15. And you needed to make sure that you knew you had your finger on the pulse of what the people of the 1st Congressional District were concerned about. Today, there are all different ways of influencing the public opinion needle. So I would have to hire people who were experts in something that I'm still learning how to appreciate myself. Facebook, Twitter, X, all of that is really so much more important than it was back then. And the other thing I think you'd have to do is really ask yourself, what are you trying to accomplish? If you are successful in running, you're running for Secretary of State, or you're running for Congress, or you're running for governor, or you're running for county commissioner here in Mobile. What are you trying to accomplish? And what's been amazing to me is people running at all levels. On the Republican side, want to associate themselves with President Trump and with the MAGA movement, even though running for license commissioner in Mobile County really might not have anything to do with President Trump. President Trump probably doesn't know who you are.
Right.
But by golly, they're going to find a way to say that they were with President Trump before anybody else was.
They're more Trump than the other guy.
That's right.
Yeah, I see that. And I had a friend of mine reach out to me yesterday that said, I'm going to host a fundraiser for a guy in January. Want to know, put it on your radar, don't have a date yet. Here's his name. And I looked at it, and it was just I'm more Trump than Trump, and I'm surely more Trump than the other guy.
Right.
And I thought, I celebrated him for getting involved, but it's not an event that I'm going to go to. I just don't see my voice being valuable there.
But Cam, in all honesty, I think that programs like the one you have here, this podcast, you have shown, it was just a couple years ago, we were both, by coincidence, flying back from San Diego. You were speaking out there. You've got a national following that sometimes when people see you in Mobile, they don't really realize that you're probably better known around the country than you are here. Because here you're just Cam. Everybody remembers when you were growing up and your family and all like that. And I think each of us have a responsibility to use those moments, whether it's behind a microphone or whether it's just in a conversation with a group of friends or around the family Thanksgiving table. I know a lot of people don't like to talk about politics, and I understand those. You don't want to talk about how sausage is made. You don't want to talk about politics. And sometimes religion can get pretty touchy too when you're talking at a family Thanksgiving meal. But everybody really needs to have some ownership in, is the country going in the direction we want it in? Are we really dealing with the kind of issues that will make America continue to be that shining city on the hill that we once remember? It wasn't just something that President Reagan said. It was really a belief that Americans had that we were special. But it was with that also a special responsibility, not to be the world's police force, not to be the one who could solve all the problems by borrowing money from China to go out and solve those problems, but by being at the table to make sure that the American voice, especially as we approach our 250th year, it's so incredibly important for people to remember our history. It hasn't always been beautiful. It hasn't always been without challenges. But man, oh man, the contributions we've made to freedom and to liberty are things that I think at the end of the day, the core Republican values, they're still a part of that.
So they're a part, they certainly have been a part of that, but your position is they will be a part of that. Make America Great Again is not exactly that. You asked the question of the American population, do you feel this country is going in the direction it needs to be? And both sides of the party today are going to say, no, we're not. And that's why we're up in arms. That's why we're taking extreme positions. That's why we're shutting down the government. That's why we scream at each other and all this kind of stuff. This infection of our nation that has caused me to do what I'm doing now with you. So the question is very simple. Are we going the direction that we want to? What happens when both sides scream loudly, no, we're not? We get what we've got here. Therefore, I go back to my premise, which you're yet another person who doesn't think it's capable. Let me say that correctly. It would need to start locally and regionally and statewide before national. That a third party with a voice of reason might be the solution when nobody can agree, when everyone believes our direction is not correct. What do you think?
Well, again, I didn't out and out say that it was impossible for a third party to be successful. But I do think that the two parties have historically done a masterful job of protecting their ballot place.
Yes.
And as long as we have a ballot as our weapon to insert our voice into the political debate of the moment, and not a gun, and not a totalitarian regime takeover. But as long as we have the ballot and free elections, then I remain hopeful. Maybe optimistic is too strong of a word, but I remain hopeful that there is a way to return to where I think you want to go, and really, quite frankly, where I and many others want to see us go as well.
Yeah. It would be hard to get elected today if the candidate came out there and said, I'm not extreme, I'm not a hothead, I don't like to yell and holler at people. I really find people who disagree with me curious, and I can't wait to speak to them and learn where their disagreements originate, and maybe they could teach me something from their point of view. I love to find compromise and to find things about my opponents that I truly admire and like about them. No one would vote for that dude today.
No, that would be hard to imagine that anyone with that campaign platform on either side would have a chance of winning. Let me tell you something I did when I got to be president at South Alabama.
I want to get into that next.
My background, as you know, is certainly not steeped with a rich academic pedigree. My sister, on the other hand, she was the first President Bonner in our family. She was president of the University of Alabama. She did it the more traditional route, although she never had a goal of being president, but she was a faculty member. She had earned her graduate degree and her master's and PhD. Came back, she was on faculty, she became a department chair, became a dean. She ended up becoming executive vice president and provost. And then the board asked her to be the 28th president of the University of Alabama. My pathway was a lot different. Yeah. I have an honorary doctorate. I don't have an earned doctorate. And so there were a lot of people, understandably, who were a little bit concerned about this has-been Republican politician coming in and being a university president at the University of South Alabama. And I knew that, and I thought it was legitimate concerns that people had. So one of the first things that happened when I got there, the college Republicans came to me and they said, President Bonner, we're so glad you're here. You know, we supported you when you were in Congress, and now we helped you get the presidency, and we'd really like for you to start coming to our monthly meetings. And I said, oh, wow, thank you for everything you did when I was a candidate. Thank you for everything you did when I was put my name in the hat to be president. I'd love to speak to your group, but I can't do it. And they looked at me like I had lost my mind or had forgotten to be appreciative. I said, I can't come speak to y'all without speaking to the college Democrats. I said, so let's do this. Let's have our first meeting, a joint meeting with the college Democrat chapter and the college Republican chapter. Well, again, it was a little bit hard for them to swallow what I was saying, but I had a ulterior motive. The college Democrats basically had the same reaction. They were like, well, why do you want us to meet with the college Republicans? But again, we got in the boardroom at the Whitten Administration Building. My provost and I, we bought pizza across the street, and we invited the officers of both the college Democrat chapter and the college Republican chapter together. And my only request was that everybody, that you didn't sit on one side of the table were the Republicans and on the other side were the Democrats. You had to sit next to someone you didn't know. And we went around the table and introduced ourselves. It took about 3 months to get organized. But you know, the amazing thing, at the end of the day, those students were in the same classes with each other. They lived in the same residence halls or apartment complexes with each other. And most all of them faced the same struggles. They might have had a grandmother who was sick, who helped raise them. They might have been struggling with their financial aid had not come through, or their scholarship wasn't as generous as they had hoped it would be, and they were wondering how they were going to pay for their college education. And at the end of that evening, they had a lot to eat, but more importantly, they had a lot to think about. And it was that, and what I said is the same thing I used to say when I was a candidate for Congress, and then when I was fortunate enough to have the privilege of representing the people of South Alabama in Congress for those 6 terms. Democrats and Republicans, and I know you can't get elected today by saying this, but it's really true. Democrats and Republicans both love America.
Mm-hmm.
They both want America to be an exceptional country. But they also have a different view of the role of government. And one view doesn't necessarily mean the other view is wrong. It's just that they're more comfortable advocating for their traditional belief in the role of government in our lives. And what I used to get frustrated with when I was in Congress was, I'd come back home for town hall meetings, and people would say, how can you even stomach sitting next to a Democrat on the House floor? And I said, well, I don't think about it like that. I think about the fact that Jim is my friend. Jim might be a Democrat from Albany, Georgia, but he represents his constituents just as passionately as I try to represent mine. And we agree on more things than we disagree on. But when we disagree, we let our vote on the floor of the House show our disagreement. We don't carry it forward and make it personal, where we go out and we have a fist fight in the House parking lot, or we go out and try to bring harm to the other person. Mm-hmm. And you let the power of ideas and ideology become your sword and not anything else. I don't know. The college Democrats and college Republicans, we did that first 3 months I was there. I've encouraged both of them to continue to be active, because I think young people of all groups have a responsibility to wear that pride of citizenship by voting and being involved. But I've also tried to encourage them to continue to find common ground, because at the end of the day, we all live in this world, and we need to find a way to work together to the best we can to solve some of the world's challenges.
How do you think the voter has changed?
Well, the voter has probably I think the voter in many ways has given up a lot of what they used to do, was independent research to determine how someone really was going to vote or lead or act, by basically taking a brand that the person wears on either side and saying, well, that's good enough for me.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Yeah. Rather than doing the research, identify with the brand, the passion that comes from people that they've generally liked. Let's shift into South Alabama, the University of South Alabama, and let's speak to you as the president of the USA. There's a lot of change going on the campus. You've brought me what did you describe it? The president's report that shows the picture of the new medical school going up. Tell me what's happening at South.
Well, we've had just enormously grateful for the opportunity to be president at South Alabama. We've had a remarkable, I started on January 1st of 2022. And thanks to just a lot of really good people, we've had an enormous amount of success. Our enrollment is up for the 3rd straight year. We've got the largest freshman class that's ever been enrolled at South. We're just 62 years old. But this past December, we graduated our 100,000th graduate.
Wow.
It took Auburn 121 years to graduate 100,000 students. When Alabama was 62 years old, they had graduated fewer than 5,000. Now, it's a different century,
Sure.
A long time ago. Alabama's looking at almost 200 years of being around, and Auburn's about 175 years, and they're both great universities. But I'm very proud of having the opportunity to build on the successes of President Whidden and President Moulton and President Waldrop. And that's what we've tried to do. We've built out a great leadership team. Not only have we had success in enrollment, our retention levels are up. I feel a personal responsibility when a student starts college and for whatever reason doesn't get that degree and ends their time in college with debt and no degree. I think we as a university and we as a community have failed that student. So we have things like free tutoring in all of our classes. College is expensive. Yesterday I was on a bus at the time we were taping this, picking up about 45 10th graders at UMS Wright School here in Mobile. The day before, we picked up 2 busloads of students at Mattie L. Blunt High School, juniors and seniors. So one of the things we started when I got there was to introduce or to reintroduce South Alabama to people even who are just down the road from us. So last year, my executive vice president and provost, Dr. Andy Kent, she and I personally were on 51 bus trips.
Yeah.
And we go take these nice athletic buses that our student athletes travel on. They've got TVs and they've got air conditioning and they've got bathrooms. We didn't have any of that when we were growing up, Cam. And we go as far away as an hour and a half. So we go into Mississippi, we go into the Florida Panhandle, we go all the way up to Clark County and Monroe County. We pick students up, and so that means sometimes Andy and I are leaving the campus at 6 o'clock to go pick up students and bring them back to campus. They get to campus, they have a Chick-fil-A biscuit with our local Chick-fil-A on campus. We show them if they're interested in engineering or in business or nursing or medicine. We show them a life of a college student. And the first thing I tell them, and at first when I started this, Dr. Kent looked at me kind of like, do you know your role here? But the first thing I would do whenever, and I do this all the time, I say, you don't have to go to college to be successful. And I start talking about the careers here in Mobile. Mobile's looking at right now filling 8,500 jobs, thanks to the support from the governor and others over the last few years in the steel industry, in the aluminum industry, in shipbuilding, in aerospace. And so I say you don't have to go to college to be successful or to make a good living. And then I use our friends at Airbus as an example. Airbus is near and dear to my heart because I worked hard to help bring them here when I was in Congress. But it's true. The students at UMass or the students at Blunt, both, when they graduate from their high school with a little training, can start working at Airbus right now as a mechanic, making $75,000 or $80,000. That's more than most of their teachers back at their school. But I'll say, but here's the clincher. If you've got the God-given talent and drive and ability, and you're willing to invest in your future with a college education, whether it's at South or at Harvard, at Bishop State or at Alabama or Auburn, then your future is going to be brighter with a college education. And I use the example that if you come to South and you major in aerospace engineering, a new program that we've started because of the growth of the aerospace industry here, then guess what? You can make $180,000 a year. So do the math. That's $1 million every decade. And I tell the students, it's not just about the money. It's about the doors that will open to them for the rest of their life. I've always been amazed at, especially people who have college educations who say, well, you don't need to go to college, just go straight into the workforce. Usually those people own the companies, right. and they're just looking to get, but those people all have a college education. So we try to be honest with them. We invite them to come to campus. Last year, our recruitment and enrollment team visited 750 high schools.
Wow.
From one coast of America to the other. Dr. Ken and I personally visited 171. And it's just 2 weeks ago, I was in Chicago. We visited 20 different schools in Chicago. This past August, we had 60 students, the largest number of freshmen we've ever had from Chicago, come to South Alabama. And the funny thing is, while most of them may not have heard of the University of South Alabama, Guess where they go to beach when they live in Chicago? They come to Gulf Shores and Orange Beach.
Straight down I-65.
So we remind them that we're right where the tunnel backs up, and just look at that billboard and realize you could be just a few minutes away from the beach in the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America, whichever you like.
Tell me this, when my phone rings from a professional point of view, as you know, I lead seminars and workshops and write and all that about workplace, workforce, marketplace trends. That's the professional hat that I wear. When my phone rings, it's typically somebody that's in their 50s complaining about somebody that's in their early to mid-20s up to, let's say, 35. Work ethic issues, retention issues, professionalism issues. There's a sales component to it as well. And they give me the expression that I wish I had a dime every time I heard it, kids these days. You live in the kids these days business. So my clients that are frustrated, and we're put together a recruiting program right now for a hospital system in California who is struggling to recruit kids these days. Their issue is we've built a hospital that's got X many years behind it. We've got a pension plan. We've got really, really generous benefits. We've created this remarkable thing, but we can't get kids these days to want to come to work for us. React to me if you would. What is it about kids these days? Why might my clients be saying this versus what you're seeing and experience on your campus?
Well, we need to introduce your clients to the students at the University of South Alabama.
It sounds like so. This was not meant to be a layup question.
Well, I will tell you, I'm so proud of our faculty and the resources that we provide our students. Everything from we've got a closet where you can go check out a suit. You get to keep the suit, but you can check out a recruiting suit or a recruiting dress or pantsuit. We help students polish up their resume. We, more importantly, help them learn how to interview, to sit across the table from a Cam Marston, to look him in the eye, to answer his questions directly. And that doesn't happen just with one session. We spend a lot of time. And one of the things we're doubling down on our emphasis on is internships and apprenticeships. We believe our Mitchell College of Business is a great example of helping young people be prepared for those interviews and realize that those jobs are the kind of jobs that are going to one day become a career. Now, my son, when I was offered the presidency at South, Robbins and I were driving to Sam's Club, and I said, "Well, your dad's about to take a new job," and he said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I've been offered the presidency of the University of South Alabama." And after he laughed, he said, "Dad," he said, "don't you think you need to settle down and just kind of stay in one lane?" I said, "Well, Robbins," I think at that time I was 62. I said, "When you're 62, I promise you, I've worked in Congress. I've worked at the University of Alabama system for 5 years. I worked for the governor of the state of Alabama, and I am working at South Alabama. So I've only really had 4 different jobs in my life. And the fact is that not one of them ever did I consider them a job. I would have worked for free because I loved everything I did in each of those times." And I said, "The problem with your generation is you probably will have 4 jobs by the time you're 30.
Oh, yeah.
And
25.
the fact is, he's is 28. He gets married in a couple of weeks, and he's already had 4 jobs. So,
Really?
So I said, when you're my age, if you can look at me and say, well, he really didn't have that many different jobs. And most of the jobs I've had, quite frankly, Cam, have been related to each other. People say, what's the difference between running for Congress and being a university president? And really, there's a lot of similarity. You've got your bosses. When I was in Congress, I had 750,000 bosses. They could vote me out of office every 2 years. Here I've got 15, the board of trustees. But really, I've got 100,000 alumni. I've got almost 12,000 employees. Got 14,285 students. And we've got so many people that have really grown to be supporters of the university that don't have any affiliation with the university, But they understand that as Mobile has grown, especially under the leadership of Mayor Stimson, that South Alabama has tried to step into this moment with the city and with the region. That's why we renamed ourselves the flagship of the Gulf Coast.
Yeah.
Because we really see our role. You mentioned our new medical school, but USA Health, and you've had the opportunity to experience that yourself.
The good fortune to experience it.
But we are so blessed to have 3 hospitals, a cancer institute, the largest college of nursing in the state, one of the largest nursing graduate programs in the nation, a medical school that's producing graduates that can go out and outperform medical student peers at Harvard, at Yale, at Hopkins, at Georgetown, at other premier medical schools. So we've got so many great things going on. So I would say, when you go back out to California, tell your clients they need to interview more students from South Alabama.
They'd have a hard time paying my fee if that was the response that I came back with. I need to create some sort of program in order for them to justify paying the thing that I'm worth. One more question for you. We're running up on time here. One more question. I was with a group of men a couple nights ago, and we talked about the danger. And I cited examples, and you can see on this whiteboard here a little bit of what I did there. I cited examples of times in history where, in hindsight, we could see that the young males of the nations, the nation states, etc. We looked at Rome. We looked at ancient Greece. We looked at the Industrial Revolution. Aimless young men, as the result of the reports suggested, make great audiences. They're looking, and they are really can be galvanized by charismatic leaders. And when they're aimless, when they have very little purpose, when they have very little, when the nation in which they live, the society in which they live, loses its drive and its direction for many different reasons, it generates aimless young men who are then really fodder for the cannon, if you will. And you can take a charismatic leader and he can galvanize these young people. And often it brings about, in the examples that I gave in this conversation earlier in the week, it can bring about the end of ancient Greece. It can bring about the end of the Roman Empire. It can bring about the end of a lot of great societies that we've known. Is your experience, talk to me about the young man. The conclusion that I drew was the young men with purpose create the future of a nation. Young men without a purpose create a vulnerable nation. What are you seeing in your world? You're in the young person business. Do you have any comments specifically about young men? And I'll add one more thing. The research that I often show my clients is the rise in female success in the schooling. I talked to a friend who works at an engineering company. He said, when I got here, there were only male engineers. Right now, there are only a few male engineers. They're all female. We're seeing this dramatic shift between male and female in education, outputs, professionals, degrees, etc. React to that for me.
Well, I meet with our students all the time. When I say I meet with them, there's not a day that passes that I'm not over in the cafeteria spending some time talking to them. When I don't invite them to come to the office, we invite students. We have an open door policy. We invite students to come in and spend a few minutes telling us about their experience. Recently, I met with the leaders of the Interfraternity Council at the University of South Alabama, as well as the National Panhellenic Council, which is the traditionally African-American fraternities and sororities, as well as the Collegiate Panhellenic, which is the traditionally Greek sororities. So I've met with those groups just in the last 2 weeks, and I've challenged them to think about their responsibilities as leaders of their Greek organizations in a way where they think about the actions, the words, the activities, and and really the agenda of their organizations. A friend of mine from the University of Alabama, Dr. Kathy Randall, used to tell students that she was mentoring, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. It's not an original statement with her, but it's one that I think rings true, especially for your question. And I've challenged them to think about, especially the young men. I said, think about when you are having a party. Now, how would you want your little sister to be treated at that party? And one day when you're my age, think about how you would want your daughter to be treated at that party. And now, look, we've got some great young men and young women on our campus, but we also have people that human nature is such that sometimes they make youthful mistakes. But I've said you just need to remember that everything you do and everything you say and the way you act, people are watching you because you're a leader. And I've really asked them to think about even the social activities they have in terms of, would you do what you're doing and would you conduct yourself the way you're conducting yourself if your parents were in the room with you?
So are you suggesting that the issue that I brought up, the aimless young male syndrome, let's call it a syndrome, is present? Are you seeing it?
I think it's present throughout society.
I agree. Think it is, right now, it certainly is.
I don't think it is any less prevalent out of our campus than it is anywhere else. But I really and truly think that a lot of that goes back to their family situation.
Mm-hmm.
One of the programs that when I was in Congress that I was very actively involved in, more so then than now, is a program that Coach Mike Gottfried started, Teen Focus, because Coach Gottfried and his brothers lost their dad when they were teenagers. My dad died when I was 13. And my mother never let me wallow in self-pity because my dad had died at a young age. She showed me love, but she showed me tough love. And she said, your father, if he were alive, would be disappointed in you, or your father would expect more from you.
Wow.
And I held myself to a standard that probably a lot of guys who in similar circumstances might not have, because my mother laid on me really a heavy burden that I was living up to my father's expectations, even though he was not there to tell me what they were. And so I don't think it is unique, but I think you're right. I think the syndrome is real, but I think it is something that society needs to confront. It's not something government can do. You can. This is a role that goes really to the heart of the matter is family.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that was one of the pieces of data I think that I shared with my group of men. Joe, I perhaps told you that we would be less than an hour. We've just crossed the 1 hour mark. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cam.
I'm grateful for what you're doing for our city. I'm grateful for your thoughts and your optimism of the future of the politics of our nation. You sound like the Republican Party that I once loved may be a home that I can rest my head in again someday. I'm not going to give up on the thought of a third party. I can't help but think that it would somehow, particularly today, be helpful. So I'm going to continue to ask those questions and encourage people to debate it with me, to tell me what they think. Find a different opinion and let's figure out what it is. So I'm grateful that you're willing to do that for me today.
Thank you. I'm honored to be with you, and it's good to be in the studio with my friend Cam Marston talking about what's working.
Yeah, we will. Thank you. We will have final comments after this. You're listening to What's Working. Hi, I'm Cam Marston. Many business leaders like you are facing declining sales, high turnover, low morale, all because of poor communication. That's why I created the Generational Insights Communications Academy. The Academy trains your leaders to communicate effectively with anyone in any situation, helping you build the thriving company you deserve. Learn more and enroll today at cammarston.com/GICA. Joe Bonner is one busy man, And for him to give me as much time as he did for this podcast, won't be able to thank him very easily. I want to really thank Joe for sharing his thoughts, his opinions on the what we talked about towards the end of our podcast together. It's what I often reference as the boy crisis. What's going on out there? And Joe told me just before he left the office, 65% of the student body at the University of South Alabama is female. So it's a problem, not a problem, but an issue he's aware of, and I'm grateful that he would be willing to discuss it. I miss a man like him in position of leadership in Congress, and I wish he still would put himself up for election and represent our part of the world. That'll close down what's working for this week. I appreciate you paying attention. Thanks to Joe Bonner for giving so much of his time and his history, his thoughts, his experiences. We'll have another What's Working show in the coming days. You're listening to What's Working. Cam Marston. Talk to you again soon.